Campbell & Company, I'd like to welcome you to Relationship Management 201, Managing the Right Prospects. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. To ensure that you have the best webinar experience possible, please follow these tips. Close any programs, then go to webinars that are running on your computer. Call in using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Move your cell phone away from your computer. And if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to Campbell & Company, or you can contact GoTo directly at 1-800-263-6317. Finally, today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you will earn 1 continuing education credit, and that's good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email from GoToWebinars that includes a web address to download your certificate, the PDF of the presentation, as well as information on how to register for our next webinar. We do welcome questions during the webinar, so if you do have any, please send a question to Campbell & Company, and I will ask them throughout. And now I'd like to take a moment to introduce Carrie Dahlquist and Kate Banta-Green. Carrie Dahlquist is the Director of Strategic Information Services at Campbell & Company. She helps organizations understand how complex information can impact the big picture and inform the decision-making process. She works with institutions to develop a roadmap that is manageable and measurable. Carrie holds a Master of Business Administration from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business with concentrations in econometrics, strategy, and economics. Kate Banta-Green is a consultant at Collins Group, a division of Campbell & Company. Kate works to connect nonprofits with the latest fundraising trends and help them to envision and execute successful feasibility studies, campaigns, and sustainable fundraising programs. She has her master's in public administration from University of Washington and her Bachelor of Science from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I'm excited to turn over to Carrie and Kate.
Great, thanks Sarah. And thanks everyone for joining us today. This is Carrie Dahlquist, and I'm really pleased to be joining you all for the third in our relationship management series. Just wanted to give a little bit of context about what we've talked about already and what we're planning to talk about today, and what we'll be wrapping up with in our fourth series. So we started with a very high overview of relationship management and Campbell & Company's approach to it on our first webinar, and then just a couple weeks ago we talked about how to identify the right prospects, and that was a much deeper dive into prospect research, resources, and strategies. Today we're going to talk about how you manage that process, how you manage the right prospects, and we're going to be talking about the relationship management process and the impact of metrics and measurement. And then we want to focus with you on how you can communicate your successes through that. And then finally, in early January, we are going to finish up with talking about the importance of being able to pull all this really great information out of your system and report it efficiently and effectively. So today, just want to do a high level of our goals for today. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about how you develop a really solid relationship management process. I'm going to think with you about how you can decide what you want to measure within your own institutions and organizations. And then really, I think sometimes we forget probably the most important thing after we put all of this effort and energy into developing processes and figuring out how to manage them effectively is really communicating effectively around the process and the metrics. So Kate's going to talk to us about the importance of relationship management.
Hi everyone, great to be here today. You know, this is probably review for most of you, but we definitely wanted to give you some context today about the importance of relationship management and the fact that Carrie and I both come from the School of Donor-Centered Relationship Management. And you know, it's really getting the annual donors, identifying them as to their capacity and their interests, and identifying them as maybe major gift prospects, cultivating them, getting them more involved, ultimately soliciting them, and having them become major donors, and then stewarding them along so that they continue to be major donors, as well as maybe upgrading over time. The importance of relationship management is it's less transactional and more transformative. That's sort of the ultimate goal of the relationship management process. And so it's about shared values and shared passion, and really ultimately over time there's a great synergy between the organization and the donor. Thank you.
Great. So now we're gonna talk about how to develop that really efficient and effective relationship management process. And we want to start with just articulating a set of goals around relationship management. This is sort of building off of what Kate was talking about a moment ago. Here we've articulated each of the stages and at a very high level talked about what it is we're trying to accomplish in each of them. So for identification, the purposes of this stage is that we're at the very beginning of the process, and we're just trying to identify those prospects who look like they have high capacity. And that we're going to talk in a minute about how a really highly effective team can come together and push an organization through this cycle. But relationship management in its infancy and identification is really going to be driven by the prospect researcher. And then in qualification, the relationship manager comes in very strongly with the goal of confirming capacity and assessing inclination. And so this is where the relationship manager is assigned and is tasked with going out to qualify or disqualify prospects. As we move into cultivation, the relationship manager's job is to develop and execute strategy to further engage prospects and really move them towards solicitation. And in this stage, they are heavily involved with working with natural partners and figuring out how to find out more and more about prospects' interests and capacity and determining how to link them and engage them more deeply with the institution. Finally, as we move into solicitation, obviously the goal of that is to make the ask and to do that in as appropriate and effective a way as possible, involving relationship managers and natural partners, however best appropriate. And then finally, as we move into stewardship, I think sometimes this is a really important stage that's sort of forgotten about sometimes, and your ability to do it effectively, I think, really can set you up for success in the future. So in stewardship, we're going to be focused on appropriately stewarding and recognizing that gift, and more importantly, continuing to engage top prospects and develop strategies and timing around requalification, and how do we keep them involved in that donor cycle that we looked at just a moment ago. So I think step one in talking through how you define your own relationship management process is to first and foremost clearly define the key roles that are involved, and we've got them sort of at a high level here. But in the way that we think about the process, you've got critical board and volunteer leaders who are really involved in setting strategies and are going to be critical as natural partners. And the more that you can leverage and involve them, the more successful you will be as a program. We've got management, and obviously management, and not only in helping define strategy, but also then, as ultimate drive for implementing strategy, providing oversight, monitoring progress, and this is where we talk about metrics and the importance of reporting, and I think managing both up and down, so up to the board, down to staff, and out to the broader community. Relationship manager is a role that we spend a lot of time talking about at Campbell & Company, and this is a single development staff person who is uniquely responsible for the coordination and implementation of individual strategies for prospects. That does not mean that they have to be the ones executing the strategy. So I think, again, leveraging natural partners when that's appropriate is a very important task of the relationship manager. But ultimately, this is the person who's responsible for a prospect and knowing where they are in the philanthropic life cycle, knowing what the high-level strategy is for deepening that engagement, and understanding what the end game is in terms of continuing to evolve their relationship with the organization and move toward an ask. And I think that relationship manager is also very much responsible for engaging support services when necessary. So we've got some of the support services listed here, and I think depending on your organization and the way that your shop is aligned, you could have even more. But some of the really important functions that we wanted to just take a moment to recognize are prospect research and management, donor relations, communications, data and gift entry personnel, and obviously leveraging systems. So these are all support services that are critical to making sure that the process moves forward smoothly and effectively. And I think both management and relationship managers are charged with leveraging these services. So now we're going to move forward at step 2. Again, this is high level, but we want to talk about just the importance of defining a process. It may look a little bit different in each organization, but again, our focus is really being mindful of these stages and the importance of moving prospects through the stages through regular interaction and through strategic moves. So developing a strategy first, making sure that you have the right teammates in place to be able to affect that strategy, and then implementing it in a coordinated and strategic manner. So again, starting with identification, here we've got some of the team members that play really critical roles: prospect research, assigning capacity, and we want to reinforce that the capacity really does need to live in the system so that it can be accessed and measured appropriately. Again, then we've got our relationship manager assigned for qualification, and as we move into qualification, the relationship manager's responsibility to either qualify or disqualify a prospect. And we spend a lot of time talking about, frankly, the importance of disqualification almost as much as qualification. So I think finding out who doesn't belong in a managed portfolio is as important in terms of leveraging your frontline officers' time and abilities. So that's qualification is a really, really important stage that I personally feel sometimes gets overlooked. So the goal of qualification, again, we're looking to confirm capacity and begin to determine interest. And as someone is qualified and moves into cultivation, our relationship manager is developing that strategy, identifying natural partners, engaging them, and continuing throughout the life cycle of cultivation, continuing to hone that strategy and move toward solicitation, where the relationship manager is finalizing and executing a strategy along with those natural partners. Prospect researcher may be pulled back in to do strategy memos or full profiles in advance of solicitation, and ultimately with the goal of making that ask, that very important ask. And then finally moving into stewardship, where again, we're focused on strategy and requalifying our prospects for the next gift. We have a relationship management flowchart that breaks these stages up into even more detail, asks critical questions, and really allows you to hone in on a set of business rules, I think, that can help reinforce this process. So we'll be sharing that at the close of today's webinar, and I think it'll be really, really helpful for those of you who feel like you need to spend a little bit more time defining your process. Before we move on, I just wanted to take a moment and talk about the importance of tracking in the system. We're going to spend some time a little bit later today discussing metrics and the importance of them. And I think it's really important to note that if something is not tracked in the system, it's much more hard to be transparent and to focus on accountability and to set goals appropriately. So, your relationships need to be tracked, and actions and interactions really need to be tracked in the system. And then just want to underscore the importance of relationship management meetings and really how critical these are to a smooth process. We all have a lot of team meetings and staff meetings, and we're probably all looking for ways to lessen the number of meetings on our calendars. But these meetings specifically focused on reviewing progress to goals, and I think very importantly discussing successes and challenges. So what are we doing effectively in our relationships with top prospects, and where are we having trouble? I think having a setting where frontline and support services can come together and talk about that is really, really important.
Hey, Carrie, this is Kate. I just have one thing to add to that, and that is when under the actions must be tracked in the system, they also need to be easy to get out of the system. So I just want to highlight that for people, that if you're putting all of your metrics in maybe like a notes section, that's really hard to query on. So Having fields in whatever database system you're using, when you're thinking about what you want to track, you also want to think about how easy it is to get it out of your system, and so the information can be most useful.
That's absolutely right, and I think we'll spend even a little bit more time talking about that in just a bit. But anytime people want to talk about metrics in the system, I'm happy to take a pause. Thanks, Kate. And then finally, we were talking about developing this process. We want to just take a moment and say, you know, once you've identified business rules and you've set your process in motion, the last step is really developing a set of guidelines around relationship management. And for Camblin and Company, we've got a few different areas that we focus on. The first is portfolio size, and we often talk about 150 prospects, for example, being the ideal portfolio size for a full-time officer. That number is really just a guideline, and maybe more in some organizations, and maybe less. A lot of different factors can impact that portfolio size, like access to research, clerical and technical support, you know, how much of a geographic territory you're covering, various involvement from volunteers, and experience of the relationship manager, as well as, you know, we tend to see smaller portfolios for those officers who work in sort of the principal level gift. So in portfolios where it will take more interactions with specific prospects to move and engage those people towards the highest level gifts, we tend to see smaller portfolio sizes. So there's a lot of things that can impact this metric or this guideline. But I think for us, the most important thing is that you be thoughtful about it, that you set a limit, and that limit has to be in relation to the % of time that somebody is able to spend on frontline activities. So, you know, for example, we say 150 prospects is the ideal size for a full-time frontline gift officer. But if you wear many hats, as most of us do, if you know involved in management, or maybe you're part-time donor relations or part-time annual giving or something else, you need to adjust the portfolio size accordingly, because we want to make sure that the size of your portfolio is going to be manageable, and you'll be able to have the opportunity to interact with all of those important prospects. Next, guidelines around portfolio balance. I think keeping a portfolio balance is really, really important. We understand that as programs are maturing, for example, you might be more heavily focused on qualification and figuring out who are your legitimate set of prospects that you're going to try to move through cultivation and towards solicitation. But I think the goal is you don't want everybody in solicitation and you don't want everybody in qualification. Not only is that important for projection purposes, so if we have 1 year where all of your prospects are in solicitation and the next where you're heavily focused on qualification, your numbers are really going to go up and down, and that's not ideal for projection purposes. Not only that, I think the set of activities that an officer has to really invest in are different among the various stages. So solicitation is really, really time intensive. When you get into negotiations and making the ask with a prospect, you need to be really, really attentive and be available. And if you have the vast majority of your prospects in that stage, there are going to be certain times in the fiscal year where you're going to be crazy. And so really having a balance, being able to look at a balanced portfolio that is moving through the pipeline is really, really important. Again, I think we're understanding that these are guidelines, and in particular as programs grow and mature, the balance of portfolios is going to shift a little bit. But I would say an ideal portfolio balance is we're looking at somewhere around 20% in qualification, 40% cultivation, and then 20% in solicitation and stewardship.
Carrie, I do have just a quick question regarding this. From an audience attendee, they asked that they missed the point that you were talking about regarding prospects and portfolios. And I know that was, you talked about some of the portfolio size during the first one. Can you repeat some of that?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about the importance of assigning prospects to portfolios. So again, that all-important relationship manager, that staff member each relationship manager has their own portfolio of assigned prospects. And we were talking about the importance of limiting the size of that portfolio. Again, our guideline is typically around 150 for a full-time officer, a full-time relationship manager, but I was saying that it's really important to recognize what % of your time you really have to spend on frontline activities and to adjust those portfolios accordingly.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And then finally, we suggest that we develop guidelines around aging and staging, and I know that's kind of an odd term, but it really focuses on the amount of time that prospects spend in each of these stages with a high-level goal in relationship management of really moving people through the pipeline and through the cycle. The idea that you don't want to have anybody spend an inappropriate amount of time in any one of these stages it's really important. So being mindful to how long somebody is in qualification or in cultivation or in solicitation, for example, and monitoring that on a regular basis is really, really important. So, I think that oftentimes there's two things that are important. I think first, making sure that people are being engaged with on a regular basis. So one of the guidelines that we often talk about is having a set of metrics around when was the last time somebody has been engaged in and we're going to spend a little bit more time later talking about the importance of interactions. But as it relates to this aging and staging, having metrics around monitoring when somebody received their last communication or engagement is important. And then being mindful of how long people are staying in these stages is also really important. So, guidelines for us, we often talk about a goal, and again, these are goals, a goal of having people in qualification no more than 90 days, cultivation no more than 6 to 18 months, and again, that depends on the prospect and the individual relationship. And then, being in solicitation for about 3 months. And there will always be outliers and reasons why prospects remain in stages longer than those goals or those guidelines recommend, and that's perfectly appropriate. But the idea is that we're going to be monitoring it and asking questions. And I think really with an eye toward, is if we can't seem to move the relationship through the pipeline for whatever reason, does that prospect need to be moved out of a managed relationship, or perhaps do they need to be moved to another relationship manager? So now we're going to spend a little bit of time, now that we've set up our process and we've talked about some guidelines around portfolio management and metrics around the importance of relationship management and how to manage that process, we're going to talk about how do you sort of measure its effectiveness. And Kate's going to tell us why measurement is important.
As you can probably tell, Carrie and I really love data. And we love data because with data, you can have really, it's just information that helps you have a really good, fruitful, meaningful, focused discussion. And from that discussion, it can also help inform decisions. So this is important to help, sort of overall, any measurements you're having that you've decided to track really should connect to your development department goals, to your business plan goals, as well as to the strategic plan of the institution. So they all should be connected, and there should be a great flow there, so that people who are actually doing the data entry and the metrics and such are understanding a bigger picture. It helps people focus on outcomes. So, it's on the relationship and the stage of the relationship, and the outcome being someone who's really engaged, as well as, financially supporting the organization. It helps provide clarity for the stakeholders. The board knows what they're supposed to do. Volunteers, if you have volunteer solicitors helping you, it helps guide them as to how many interactions we need to have and want to have, and meaningful engagement opportunities for folks to ultimately get them to a higher level of fiscal engagement and such. And it also helps maybe the data entry, maybe the prospect research folks also understand and clarify the importance of what they're doing and why they're doing it, how it fits into an overall goal. It helps promote accountability. If I know how many people are in my portfolio and that, it's 3/4 of the year has gone, but I'm only halfway through my portfolio, it means I need to be having some more of these important interactions with people. And provides incentive. Again, if I am being measured on the amount of one-on-one conversations I'm having, or how many people I'm helping bring into the organization, I'm going to be motivated by a number that is realistic and obtainable, but also maybe a stretch. So it just helps provide clarity for folks as to why measurement's important and the overall structure and how it's going to be used.
Great. But I think we can all agree it's really important, but obviously it also comes with a lot of challenges, and we wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge those, and then we're going to very quickly work on getting past them. But just want to, I think this first one it really does require commitment from leadership is really critical. I think Kate and I would agree that oftentimes where we have seen programs struggle with the idea of metrics and implementing these processes and measurements effectively, oftentimes it turns out that leadership just really isn't committed and really isn't backing the process and really isn't making sure that the staff time that's required to do this has been committed. I think also acknowledging that really oftentimes this represents a culture shift. So as we move into a more metric-focused world, and I think sometimes that's really being driven, frankly, by our board. So if you think about board members who are often involved in the for-profit industry and are used to seeing numbers and goals reported on a regular basis and used to seeing how those tie into strategy, I think that has really been a source of some of this culture shift. So, it starts at the top, but I think oftentimes it's hard, in particular for people that have been in the industry longer, where this has, the idea of metrics hasn't historically been a part of their job description, and it didn't matter because they got the work done, they got the money came in, but now we're going to begin to measure it. I think sometimes that can be difficult for people to absorb. Again, making sure that we've got the time to develop and implement these effectively is really important. Making sure that metrics are balanced. Kate and I were talking the other day about gift processing, for example. And sometimes we really want our gift processors to focus on accuracy and making sure that that data entry goes in just as quickly as possible. But it's also really, really important if you're gonna try to incentivize accuracy, or did I say accuracy?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. That was the second part. We want them to focus on accuracy. We want to make sure that the data goes in right, but we also want to make sure that it goes in quickly. And so making sure that those two metrics are balanced is really important. You don't want to incentivize speed without incentivizing accuracy, because then you can really you can have unintended consequences when that happens. So again, making sure that the data points are relevant to our staff members and the positions they hold within the organization, making sure that they have ownership of them and it's something that they can really individually impact, I think is really important. And making sure that it's accessible. Kate talked a few moments ago about the importance of having this information live in the system so people can see it and the system can support it is really, really critical.
I do have some questions from the audience from, not this slide, but from the prior one in terms of if we can repeat the percentage recommended for balancing prospects in each stage. If that would be possible.
Sure.
We actually had a couple of people asking that. So.
Sure, we were talking about portfolio balance, and we'll have this up on the website after today's session, but our guidelines, and again, these are just guidelines, but our goals for balanced portfolios are 20% in qualification, 40% in cultivation, and then 20% in both solicitation and stewardship.
Okay, great, thank you.
So we're going to talk again just a moment about, we call them the ABCs of selecting metrics. And Kate has already referenced a few of these, but just so that we have them all in one place. We really, really want to focus on making sure that our metrics are aligned. As she talked about a few moments ago, making sure that we have the strategic plan of the institution in mind when we're thinking through our team goals, our individual goals, making sure that everything sort of cascades up and down, and that we're measuring the right activities to be able to promote institutional goals. We want to make sure that they're balanced, that the inputs and outputs, sometimes called leading and lagging indicators, are balanced. Again, those minimal trade-offs that I was talking about a moment ago. Let's make sure that we know what we're measuring and why. And it's really important, this idea of inputs, I think, is just as important as outputs. I think sometimes we spend way too much time, for example, focusing on dollars raised. And dollars raised it's an output, and you measure it, and by the time you get your dollars raised, there's not a whole lot that you can do to affect that. But those inputs, how those interactions, and if people are being visited with, and if people have relationship managers, and if we are engaging them appropriately and developing strategies, there are all kinds of inputs that we can measure that can really help drive to the output. So the output's important, but making sure all of the things earlier in the system that are going to impact that is also really important. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, making sure that metrics are within individuals' control. So I don't want to task an individual officer with a metric that they can't kind of wrap their arms around and really take ownership of. Finally, we want to make sure that they're clear and simple. I think Kate talked a moment ago about the importance of communicating, and she's going to talk in a little bit more about the importance of communicating with both staff and leadership. And so making sure that people can understand very clearly what the metrics are, what the goals are, how they align with your mission and your strategy. Making sure that they're appropriate for your organization at this time. I think sometimes as an industry we get a little bit too hung up on best practices and industry standards. And what's appropriate, and how can you grow as an organization and grow into a set of metrics that's appropriate. And then finally, as we've mentioned now a couple times, it's really critical that you're able to track metrics in the world. If you have to sort of manually cobble them together, or if they're going to live with one staff member to try to pull together, it's going to end up creating a lot of confusion, and will take a lot of staff time to help try to manage. So I mentioned a moment ago the idea about sort of maturing programs. I'm not going to get into, we're going to make this presentation available, and so I won't get into too much depth here on this slide. The idea of this slide is sort of just knowing where you are on the spectrum. We've got one in developing programs all the way to mature, and we've got some indicators here that might help you in your recognition of sort of where you are on the spectrum. And so all of that to say, you need to get your arms around what's reasonable for where you are in the growth of your program. And I think that knowing where you are on the spectrum can really help you come up with a reasonable set of guidelines and expectations, and sort of know what you're trying to manage too. And again, we're going to talk in a little while about the importance of being able to communicate that. But I think if you can communicate that as it relates to where you are in the growth and maturity of your program and what your goals are moving forward, that can align all of these pieces in a really effective and clear and simple way. Kate, is there anything you want to highlight on this slide before we move on?
No, just want to really emphasize that, we're talking about a portfolio size of 150 prospects, and that if you're a one-person or a four-person shop, that may not be realistic. So that's why we really wanted this webinar to be very inclusive and help people figure out and really think about what is appropriate for them depending on the size of the program and the amount of administrative support and such. So I do recommend people look at this to help decide sort of where they are in the spectrum and what metrics are possible and realistic for them to measure.
Great. So speaking of which, you're going to talk about what we can measure.
Here we are. So here we are going to have some ideas for you as to what to measure, and this is in addition to money. Of course, you know, boards are always looking at the percent of money raised to date compared to what the budget is, compared to what it was last year and such, and all that is important. But it is also in relationship management important to recognize all the steps that go with that, and you can have metrics at all different levels. So one is, you know, as Carrie mentioned, for support staff or administrative personnel, you know, data entry is the timeliness and accuracy are both really important. And, you know, we really want thank yous to go out within 24 to 48 hours, and a lot of times the money needs to get in the system before it can generate a thank you or a receipt. So that is really important, and developing a metrics around that and an expectation is important. Then for some fundraising programs, you can look at events and what is the return on investment for an event. And track that over time, and maybe you have your event is really for acquisition and new, you know, new people to the organization, and tracking that. Or if there are people that keep coming to events or 2 or 3 events of yours in a year, that's great to know. These people are really engaged, and maybe they are ones that you need to get to know. Volunteer activities, you can involve program staff in some of this. What are the number of volunteer activities that are available, the number of hours per volunteer, maybe a median number of hours per volunteer, and is that growing, is that shrinking, do we need to expand some outreach in that area. Looking at membership or alumni relations, a lot of this is, you know, very typical in fundraising, but retention, how many people are giving year after year, acquisition, how many number of new donors, reactivation, maybe we lost some but we've gotten them back, what are our numbers there, as well as people who have upgraded to different levels. All great measurements that are not specifically dollars but are related to the engagement and relationship of the donors. And similarly in annual giving, again, it's the retention, people giving year after year, and ultimately, you know, the number of planned giving society members is a great indicator of how many transformative relationships maybe that you have, because really the ultimate in a transformative relationship is someone giving to you in their will. You know, they want your organization and your good work to continue even when after they have passed. And so that is a great thing to measure over time. We're going to talk next about, for specific fundraising staff, and this is really sort of a major gift officer, the number of level 1 interactions to track, and the next slide actually has some description of what I mean by that. And level 1, and you know, you can even think of this as your donor pyramid, where the top 80% of your money comes from the top 20% of your donors, and those are people that you should be really having great conversations in person, site visits, tours. They should be super engaged in your organization and with your major gift officer or a close volunteer or someone that they're close with at the organization. The level 2 are purposeful conversations, maybe not as focused, but maybe you saw someone at an event and had a great conversation. It's a phone call. I saw this article and I thought of you and emailed it to the person. It's a good email dialogue, but it's not as focused as a one-on-one conversation. And then a level 3 is a little more distance. It's mailings, it might be newsletters, just a one-way email. And this is a way that you can help your NGOs really focus. And it's the level 1 conversations and interactions that are really going to be the most fruitful. So in the next slide, again, what are some of these things that you can actually measure and develop metrics around? The number of level 1 interactions in a year. We had talked about number of people in a portfolio. That might be 150, and you might have to have, you may want your MGOs to have, 100, 125, 150 one-on-one conversations. You can also measure the percent of prospects in a portfolio that have an individual strategy attached to them. So these people, you've really thought through what is their tie to the organization, what is it that what program is it specifically that they like, how is it that we're going to get them engaged some more, and what do we think will be the the ultimate reason for them to give and support the organization. It could be the number of solicitations for your staff. Again, the amount people give is a little out of your control, though we do our best when we do the qualifying and prospect research. But people have busy and full lives, and so if you have an expectation for your MGO about the number of solicitations, that just can help guide their work over a year. And then, of course, we all really do look at dollars raised, even though this webinar isn't about that, because that, the budget is important and is an easy, dollars raised are the easy metrics here. And then, there can be some program goals, and it can be the number of people that are qualified in your system or in your major gift officers portfolio. It can be the number of cultivation events that your organization is having, and they're small. I'm picturing sort of house parties, salon style, exclusive event for, and that would be included in the level 1 interactions. Maybe it's the number of new major gift donors. You have some people that are just under the threshold. Can you set a goal for getting those people or new people in as a major donor?
Great, thank you, Kate. There was a lot of great information there, and I know, Sarah, we've been getting some questions around specific metrics and goals. So I'm hoping that we were able to answer a lot of those in Kate's last comments. But obviously, if you still have questions about that, let us know. So Kate just spent some time talking about metrics and different ways that metrics can relate to your program goals. And we just wanted to talk about how you set goals around those metrics. And I think the most important thing is to, again, be realistic about staff time. You don't want to say that an officer needs to do 15 face-to-face or level 1 visits a month if it turns out that they really are only able to dedicate 50% of their time to frontline activities. So be realistic. Again, getting back to that idea of developing a baseline for what % of time, in particular for major gift fundraising, what percentage of time they have to dedicate to activities is really important. Although I would say, that relates to any role, really. If you've got somebody who's part-time prospect research and part-time donor relations, or administrative and gift processing, I think you need to be really conscientious about how much time they have to dedicate to the function and what is a realistic goal related to that. I think, I talked a little bit about industry sort of best practice and standards. I think that can be informative, but even more important, just understanding where you are. We talked about the importance of recognizing where you are on the spectrum, and I think just setting benchmarks from where you've been to where you're going. And I think as long as you're showing incremental growth and you're doing that in a strategic way, your own benchmarks can be far more useful than industry standards. And I think probably most importantly, Kate and I have spent some time talking about really how critical it is to set up the first year as a beta test or as a pilot year. I think this can really help address, in particular, in those situations where we're talking about a culture shift, and there might be some trepidation about setting up a set of metrics and what they're gonna mean for the organization and for the individual. Just saying, being clear with the staff that we're going to try this out, we're going to try to figure out the right set of metrics, and we're going to test it for a year, and we're going to refine it. We're going to gather input, and we're going to refine it, over the course of the next year, and then, that will allow us to set a course for the future. I think is really, really important. So with that, we wanted to just take a moment and pull the audience and see, now that we've talked about the process and the importance of metrics and talked about, the spectrum, we're just curious from those in the audience, which of these metrics that we've talked about already do you think that you can either implement in the coming year or improve upon if you're already doing them? And we talked about more than this, but some of the ones that we're considering right now are your data entry, again, focus on timeliness and accuracy, volunteer activity and hours, those attendees, whether new or returning for events, and retention and membership, alumni relations, and annual giving, and then finally those level 1 interactions that Kate talked a moment ago for major gift staff or fundraising staff. So we're curious, what do you think that you can do in the coming year? And it looks to me like the results are coming in. We've got a lot of people focused on data accuracy, data entry accuracy and timeliness. Like about 60% of you say that you can either implement or improve that accuracy and timeliness around data entry in the coming year. And about 80% of you are really focused on those level 1 interactions for fundraising staff. We only have, it looks like we have about 20% focused on that volunteer activity and hours. So that might be something to consider. Again, how do we keep those volunteers engaged, and how do we hold ourselves accountable for keeping them engaged, because they can be really great advocates. We've got around 40% of you saying that you're focused on new and returning attendees to events, and around just over 40% focused on retention. So some really good statistics there. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun.
So we're going to now shift. We've talked about developing a process. We've talked about setting up metrics and what you can focus on, in the coming year. And now we're gonna wrap up with how you communicate those effectively.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And we have touched on this sort of throughout, but we thought it was worth really having just a section on it. If you're going to have your staff now start collecting data and using the metrics, you really just need to explain the goal as to why you're going to start doing that. And if you can connect it to your development plan and your strategic plan and the overall vision and mission of your organization, all the better. Explain each person's important role in this and how it all comes together and how they're all moving the organization forward with their hard work. It's worth sharing the successes and the challenges, both higher up at a board level and also at a staff level. What's working, what's not, you really need to be open to that. And like Carrie had said, you really want to sort of start piloting it, because it can cause a lot of anxiety for folks, because this can be a cultural shift. When you talk about, a lot of people aren't thinking metrics when they think relationship-based fundraising. So all of this is really, transparency is really important. So just being clear about the goals of the metrics and how they're going to be used is really helpful. And then in the next slide, I'm just going to talk quickly about getting the whole organization on board. And first is really be consistent with the language that you use. If you're talking acquisition, are you talking discovery calls? Just clear, consistent language can be really helpful. Again, early buy-in, let people know why you're doing this, the importance of it, and the bigger picture as to how it's going to help the department, help the organization, all move forward. It's important to share progress, that if people feel like they're doing all this data entry and collecting all these information, it's important that they see what the output is with that what the actual numbers are, and it can be maybe quarterly as a team, it can be monthly and maybe a manager meeting with an MGO and a manager meeting. Maybe you can see how your MGOs are doing individually on a monthly basis, and they can also share what's working and what's not working. And then this may be a new job on top of an already full job, and so really thank everyone involved and really appreciate the effort that they're putting in to help this metric system work. And quickly, I am going to talk next about 2 examples, and we really wanted this to work for lots of different people and lots of different agencies and sizes and such. And the first example I have is an emerging program, and it's one here in Seattle. It's a small program. I think they have about 12 staff, and they have about 100 major donors. A major donor for them is about $1,000 a year, and I think they have 1.5 development staff, and that includes some volunteer coordination. So this program, this organization is looking at their number of major donors and want to increase it by 10%. And then they're looking at the substantial conversations and those level 1 interactions. And the goal is to meet one-on-one with every single major donor this coming year. They also have a goal to get the board involved, because they're not all that comfortable talking to donors, and fundraising for some can be kind of scary. So starting off with just meeting the donors and having these conversations and hearing about the importance this organization is in the donors' life and how they want to be involved and things like that. And then they're looking at their retention rate. They've decided that they want to get to 60%. I've seen 66% as a general rule and goal for a retention rate. I've seen anywhere between 60 and 70%. But this particular organization was going to use 60%. And then they were going to track the longevity of giving. They're about 15 years old, and so they wanted to see how many people were giving over a 5-year consecutive time and try and increase that over the next couple of years. The next program is a mature program, and it is a higher educational institution here in Seattle. And this is a portfolio of an Associate Director of Advancement, which is really an MGO. And the minimum capacity rating for this person's prospects and portfolio are $50,000. So this NGO has about between 75 to 100 prospects at any given time. The expectation is that they will have 100 to 125 substantial conversations. Again, there's level 1 interactions that does not include events. They're focused, very focused conversations. This role is to have 12 to 20 asks submitted in a year, and then also have 60 contacts made for prospects, and they call them discovery calls. So this is the numbers that they review and go over, and this is for this particular organization. How they do some portfolio management. Interesting enough, this organization does not track dollars raised per MGO, and that is because they do not want the MGOs to rush the donors based on the MGO's time and not on the donors' time. So that's just an FYI. It's kind of interesting. Most people do have some sort of dollar raised, incentive and goal as a part of their portfolio. it looks like we are wrapping up with our particular slides, and am happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Kate and Carrie. We have a number of questions. I know we're running out of time, but I want to address just a few of them. If we are not able to get to your question, we will certainly send you an email. But one of the first questions I received is, do you have a recommendation for foundation gift officers as far as portfolio size?
I think, Kate, I can take a shot at that, and you let me know if you have additional thoughts. I think we definitely tend to see foundation gift officers having much smaller portfolio sizes than major gift officers. I think these are relationships that require, proposal writing and all kinds of reporting. We tend to see them, I would say, if a full-time major gift officer is in the 150 range of prospects, we oftentimes see our foundation gift officers maybe in the range of 50 prospects that they're working at any given time. And again, they're involved in sort of every phase of that relationship development.
Great. Kate, I don't know if you had anything to add to that. Feel free to.
Yeah, that was great.
Okay. Next question is, generally our donors are not interested in one-on-one meetings. What are your suggestions about achieving level 1 contacts in this situation?
That's a great question. I'm happy to start with that, Carrie, and then have you put any input. Sometimes you're right. A lot of donors say, "Oh, don't bother with me," and that's fine. You want to respect that. It may be that instead of one-on-one, they may be up for a small group gathering. That may be some of their peers or some of their friends. If there's any sort of, if you can provide any information for them, like or any sort of deep dive discussion on a particularly relevant topic, sometimes that can be really a great way to engage people. If it's a small group gathering, maybe 10 people, and it's going to be a certain topic of food insecurity in this area, hosted by the local food bank or something like that. So I would, if they don't want to do one-on-one, I would try and just get them involved in some small group gatherings. And if there's some information you can share with them, if there's a special speaker coming or a special paper coming out or some sort of way to engage them topically, that can be a way to do it. Carrie, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's great. I think the only thing that I would add from my own personal experience as a major gift officer is that sometimes, even if I was the one communicating, I definitely had prospects that, despite the fact that I thought I was pretty wonderful, I just didn't get the sense that they were particularly interested in seeing me. And so I think really thinking through those natural partners that you can leverage. And for me, I worked at an educational institution, and it was one thing. We had some people that liked to talk to the dean and some that liked to talk to the president, and we had a whole other group of people that liked to talk to professors. And so I think being mindful of what you know about a prospect, and if you're not the right person to engage with them, thinking through who may be a better fit.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. We're just going to ask one more final question. I know that there are others. Again, we're just going to be respectful of everyone's time on this call. We'll make sure to send you an email. But the last question is I guess more of a statement, but I'd love to learn about proposed standing agendas for relationship management meetings.
Yeah, I can take that one. And I think we've got a sample agenda that I'm happy to put up on the website, and it starts with a focus on, so we're talking about a regularly scheduled relationship management meeting, and what are the topics that should be covered within those meetings. And I would say for me, they tend to start with first a focus on prospect identification and getting a report, sort of high-level report on new prospects that have been identified and may be available for assignment. And then I think the great thing about having metrics and having reports, which again it will be the focus of our next webinar, but having reports that clearly show summaries of proposals and stage and activities, having a really good relationship management report, and we have samples of those as well, but having a really clear relationship management report allows relationship management meetings to really be focused on kind of summarizing activity rather than individual officers having to go around the table and try to explain what they've been up to. And so I think for me that's where I see relationship management meetings really transform from being sort of very in the weeds where we all sit around the table and say, well, I made 5 visits last month and I've got 3 coming up, and just kind of summarizing activity to being much more strategic. And for me, that's where I really like to focus my time. So first, celebrating successes. So what's happened in the last month or since we've all convened last that we're excited about? What are some of our big wins? What prompted those? Were we involving organizational leadership, or did we try out a new strategy, or was this a new donor that we finally kind of got to take that step? So acknowledging those successes, and then I think really being able to leverage the brain power around those tables to think through challenges. And I think the question is about having prospects who aren't particularly interested in one-on-one meetings is a great one to discuss at relationship management meetings. So, who else has had that experience, and are there different strategies that have been particularly successful that your colleagues might try in advance of the next meeting? So I'm happy to post some sample agendas, but for me, that's the way I like to think about the flow. Kate, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's great. I agree.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, obviously, we have a number of items that we'll be posting on our website from all of your great questions, and then we'll be sure to get back to you if we haven't been able to address them. But first off, thank you to Kate and Carrie for joining us today. It was super insightful, and thank you to everyone else who joined us today. We hope that you have a really wonderful and happy Thanksgiving season. We are excited to continue our relationship management series at noon on January 15th. You'll see that on the screen, and you can register at our website. So we are all set for today. We hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.